Sometimes the truth does not knock on the door. It waits quietly behind it until the right person accidentally hears every word. Damien Moretti had built his reputation on discipline, patience, and perfect timing. At 37 years old, he controlled a business empire that stretched across Chicago with the calm confidence of a man who never allowed emotions to cloud his judgment. His associates admired his ability to read people before they spoke. His competitors respected the quiet authority that surrounded him wherever he went. Yet there was one person Damien had never questioned: Victoria Langford. In less than 3 weeks, she would become his wife. Every major detail of the wedding had already been arranged. Invitations had been delivered. Luxury florists transformed the Moretti estate each morning with fresh white roses. Designers traveled from New York to complete final fittings. Friends described them as the perfect couple: elegant, sophisticated, unshakable. Damien had every reason to believe the future waiting for him was exactly as he had planned. That evening, however, life quietly abandoned every plan he had ever made. Rain tapped gently against the enormous windows of the Moretti estate as Damien returned home nearly 2 hours earlier than expected after an important business dinner ended ahead of schedule. The mansion stood unusually peaceful. Most of the staff had already finished their evening responsibilities, and soft golden lights illuminated the marble hallways with a warm glow. Damien loosened his tie while walking toward the private library, intending to review several documents before joining Victoria for dinner. Then he heard voices. They came from inside the library. The heavy wooden door remained slightly open, leaving only a narrow space between the polished frame and the hallway. Damien immediately recognized Victoria's voice. Calm, elegant, confident. Another softer voice answered. Serena Brooks, Victoria's personal maid. Damien slowed his footsteps without thinking. He had no intention of listening. Privacy mattered to him. He respected it. He was about to continue walking when one sentence reached him with perfect clarity. No one can ever tell Damien what really happened. His hand froze on the leather folder he was carrying. Every sound around him seemed to disappear. Even the rain outside faded into silence. Serena spoke carefully. Miss Langford, I do not feel right hiding this anymore. Victoria laughed quietly, a sound Damien had always believed carried warmth. Tonight it felt strangely unfamiliar. You are worrying about something that will never matter. After the wedding, everything belongs to me anyway. Damien remained perfectly still behind the partially opened door. His expression never changed, yet something inside him shifted so quietly that even he did not recognize it at first. Serena answered again, her voice trembling slightly. He deserves honesty. Victoria sighed with clear impatience. Honesty does not build the life we are about to have. Loyalty does. Remember who pays your salary. Silence followed. Damien expected Serena to respond immediately, but several long seconds passed without a single word. He could almost imagine the young maid lowering her eyes, struggling between fear and conscience. Finally, Serena spoke so softly that Damien had to focus to hear every word. Money has never mattered as much to me as sleeping peacefully at night. Damien felt his heartbeat slow instead of quicken. Years of experience had taught him one valuable lesson. When people stopped pretending, their quietest words usually carried the greatest truth. He still did not know what secret they were discussing. He did not know why Serena sounded burdened or why Victoria sounded so certain. But for the first time since proposing to the woman he believed he loved, Damien realized there was an entire conversation happening inside his own home that he had never imagined existed. Without making the slightest sound, he stepped backward into the shadows of the hallway, choosing not to interrupt, choosing not to reveal his presence, because every instinct told him that whatever came next would change far more than a single evening inside the Moretti estate. Serena Brooks left the library only after Victoria dismissed her with a polite smile that disappeared the moment the heavy wooden door closed behind her. She paused in the quiet hallway, holding a silver serving tray against her chest while taking one slow breath before continuing toward the grand staircase. The estate looked magnificent beneath the warm glow of crystal chandeliers, yet to Serena it often felt far larger than it truly was. Every polished marble floor, every priceless painting, and every carefully arranged bouquet reminded her that she was expected to remain invisible while making everything around her appear perfect. She never complained. She simply worked with the same quiet care she had carried throughout her life. At 29 years old, Serena had been employed at the Moretti estate for almost 18 months. She arrived before sunrise each morning and often finished long after sunset. She organized Victoria's schedule, prepared guest suites before important events, arranged fresh flowers throughout the mansion, and somehow remembered every small preference that made life easier for everyone else. The kitchen staff respected her because she always thanked them by name. The gardeners admired her because she noticed their work before anyone else did. Even the security team appreciated the homemade cookies she occasionally baked during holidays using recipes her grandmother had taught her years earlier. Serena believed kindness did not become less valuable simply because no one noticed it. That belief had carried her through difficult seasons long before she ever stepped inside the Moretti estate. She had grown up in a modest neighborhood on the south side of Chicago where her mother worked as a school cafeteria manager and her father repaired city buses for more than 3 decades. They had never possessed great wealth, but they insisted their daughter leave every place better than she found it. Serena remembered those words every morning while carefully straightening framed photographs or replacing fresh flowers before guests arrived. Excellence, her mother often said, was a habit rather than a performance. Later that evening, Serena entered Victoria's dressing room, carrying freshly pressed garments for another wedding fitting. Victoria stood before a full-length mirror while a designer adjusted the elegant fabric around her shoulders. Without looking away from her reflection, Victoria spoke calmly. Tomorrow I expect every guest suite to be prepared before noon. Serena nodded politely. Yes, Miss Langford. Victoria studied herself for another moment before speaking again. And remember our conversation. Some subjects are better forgotten. Serena lowered her eyes respectfully. I understand what you said. Victoria finally turned toward her. Do you? Her voice remained pleasant, but something about the question carried unexpected weight. Serena answered carefully. I always try to do the right thing. For the briefest moment, silence settled across the room. Then Victoria smiled once more, elegant and composed, as though nothing uncomfortable had been spoken at all. That is exactly why I trust you. Serena quietly left with the empty garment bags. Yet those words stayed with her far longer than she wished. Trust should never require someone to ignore their conscience. As she walked through the peaceful hallway toward the staff quarters, she noticed a family portrait of Damien and Victoria displayed beneath soft wall lighting. Damien's expression reflected calm confidence. Victoria's smile appeared flawless. Anyone passing that photograph would have believed they were looking at 2 people standing on the edge of a beautiful future. Serena paused for only a second before continuing on her way, silently hoping that whatever truth remained hidden inside the Moretti estate would somehow find its way into the light before promises became permanent, never realizing that someone else had already begun hearing far more than she could possibly imagine. The following morning, dawn arrived wrapped in a pale layer of mist that drifted across the gardens surrounding the Moretti estate. But Damien Moretti found no peace in the quiet beauty outside his bedroom window. He had slept only a few hours, not because of business concerns or wedding preparations, but because a handful of carefully spoken sentences refused to leave his mind. During breakfast, Victoria appeared exactly as she always had. She greeted the staff warmly, complimented the chef on the fresh pastries, and spoke enthusiastically about floral arrangements for the ceremony scheduled less than 3 weeks away. Her smile remained graceful, her manners flawless, and every gesture reflected the elegant woman Damien believed he had chosen to spend the rest of his life with. If he had not overheard the conversation the previous evening, he would have noticed nothing unusual. Yet every word she spoke now seemed accompanied by another question hidden beneath the surface. Damien answered politely, never allowing the slightest hint of suspicion to appear on his face. Years of experience had taught him that emotions revealed too early often concealed the truth instead of exposing it. Across the breakfast room, Serena quietly poured fresh coffee before replacing a vase of white lilies that had begun to wilt overnight. She performed every task with the same steady focus Damien had seen many times before, yet this morning he studied her differently. He remembered the hesitation in her voice. He remembered the sentence that had lingered longer than any other. He deserves honesty. Those 3 words carried a sincerity that could not easily be manufactured. Serena never looked toward Damien for more than a brief moment. She completed her work with calm professionalism before excusing herself to prepare guest rooms for another afternoon of wedding planning. Watching her leave, Damien realized she carried none of the confidence of someone protecting a secret for personal gain. Instead, she seemed burdened by something she wished she did not have to carry at all. After breakfast, Damien canceled 2 non-essential meetings and retreated to his private office overlooking the Eastern Gardens. Shelves lined with leather-bound books surrounded the room, while soft morning lights stretched across the polished walnut desk where countless important decisions had been made over the years. Today, however, he reached for nothing except his own memories. He replayed the past 12 months with Victoria, one conversation at a time. Every celebration, every promise, every explanation that had once sounded perfectly reasonable. Slowly, small details he had ignored began arranging themselves into an entirely different picture. Business dinners she had insisted on attending alone because they involved charitable committees. Unexpected changes to wedding expenses she had explained with confident ease. Occasional moments when Serena appeared uncomfortable whenever certain subjects surfaced. None of those memories proved anything by themselves, yet together they created an uneasiness Damien could no longer dismiss. Late that afternoon, Daniel Mercer, Damien's longtime advisor and closest professional confidant, arrived to review final preparations for the upcoming ceremony. Daniel immediately noticed the unusual silence filling the office. "You seem distracted," he observed while placing several folders on the desk. Damien looked toward the rain beginning to fall beyond the tall windows before answering carefully. "Tell me something, Daniel. How well do we truly know the people we trust?" Daniel paused, surprised by the question. "Sometimes we know only the version they choose to show us." Damien nodded almost imperceptibly. "That is exactly what I have been wondering." He offered no further explanation, and Daniel respected the silence. As the afternoon faded into evening, Damien stood alone beside the window, watching raindrops trace quiet paths down the glass. For the first time since asking Victoria to marry him, certainty had quietly given way to doubt, and somewhere else inside the same estate, the one person struggling most to protect her conscience still had no idea that the man she hoped to protect had already begun searching for the truth. That evening, the Moretti estate settled into an unusual stillness as gentle rain continued falling across the sprawling gardens. Crystal wall sconces cast soft golden reflections along the marble corridors, and the quiet elegance of the mansion concealed the growing tension beneath its polished surface. Damien Moretti walked through the estate with the same composed confidence every member of the household had come to recognize. But tonight each familiar hallway carried a different meaning. He no longer viewed the mansion simply as the place where his future would begin. It had become the place where unanswered questions quietly waited behind closed doors. After dinner, Victoria excused herself, explaining that she wanted to review seating arrangements with her wedding planner before tomorrow's appointments. Damien smiled politely and wished her a productive evening, never allowing the slightest hint of suspicion to reach his expression. As soon as she disappeared upstairs, he remained alone beside the grand fireplace, calmly watching the flames dance across polished stone while considering every possibility. Less than 15 minutes later, he noticed Serena carrying a stack of freshly pressed table linens toward the west wing. Her pace was steady, but the thoughtful expression on her face suggested she was carrying far more than folded fabric. Damien remained where he was, allowing her to pass without interruption. Moments later, another familiar voice echoed faintly from the hallway above. "Victoria." Damien quietly followed at a respectful distance, careful that his footsteps blended naturally with the soft ticking of the antique grandfather clock standing near the staircase. As he approached the private sitting room adjacent to the library, he realized the door had once again been left slightly open. Inside, Victoria stood near the fireplace while Serena remained beside the window holding a leather portfolio filled with wedding documents. Victoria's voice sounded calm, almost reassuring. "You have been unusually quiet these past few days." Serena answered honestly. "I have been thinking." Victoria smiled faintly. "Thinking too much often creates unnecessary problems." Serena lowered the portfolio onto a nearby table before speaking with gentle sincerity. "There are moments when silence becomes heavier than words." Damien remained completely motionless outside the room. He neither leaned closer nor attempted to reveal himself. He simply listened. Victoria walked slowly toward Serena. You have always been dependable. That is why I hired you. I need you to continue being dependable for just a little longer. Serena looked down briefly before meeting Victoria's eyes again. Miss Langford, I never wanted to become part of something that could hurt someone. Victoria folded her hands calmly. No one is being hurt. Damien has everything he could possibly want. After the wedding, life will continue exactly as planned. Serena shook her head almost imperceptibly. Plans built without honesty rarely stay standing forever. Those words lingered inside the quiet room longer than either woman expected. Victoria's pleasant expression tightened for only an instant before returning to perfect composure. You worry far too much. Once the ceremony is over, none of this will matter anymore. Damien felt no anger as he listened. Instead, he experienced something far more unsettling. Clarity. Every sentence confirmed that Serena was not protecting herself. She was wrestling with her conscience while someone else insisted that appearances mattered more than truth. Without making the slightest sound, Damien stepped away from the doorway and disappeared into the dimly lit corridor before either woman noticed his presence. He still did not know the complete story, and he refused to make conclusions based on fragments alone. Yet one certainty had quietly taken root inside his mind. The woman preparing to become his wife was asking another person to carry a burden that clearly did not belong to her. And before making the most important decision of his life, Damien knew he would uncover every missing piece, no matter how patiently he had to wait. The next several days unfolded with remarkable calm on the surface, yet beneath the polished routine of the Moretti estate, Damien Moretti quietly began answering questions that no one knew he was asking. He changed nothing about his daily schedule. He attended meetings, reviewed contracts, welcomed wedding vendors, and shared meals with Victoria exactly as he always had. To every guest and employee, the approaching ceremony appeared more certain than ever. Only Damien understood that each passing hour was no longer bringing him closer to a wedding. It was bringing him closer to the truth. Rather than confronting anyone, Damien relied on the habit that had guided every successful decision throughout his career. He observed. He listened. He compared words with actions. Small details that once seemed insignificant slowly began fitting together with unsettling precision. Wedding invoices had been quietly redirected through accounts Damien had never approved. Several charitable donations Victoria frequently mentioned could not be verified through the foundation records. Explanations that had once sounded perfectly reasonable now appeared strangely rehearsed when viewed alongside everything else he had recently discovered. None of the findings alone proved dishonesty, but together they formed a pattern that Damien could no longer ignore. Late one afternoon, while reviewing financial reports inside his private office, Daniel Mercer entered carrying several updated documents related to the wedding budget. Damien calmly studied each page before asking an unexpected question. Has Miss Langford requested changes to these contracts recently? Daniel adjusted his glasses before checking the files. Yes, several revisions during the past 2 months. I assumed you had already approved them privately. Damien slowly closed the folder. I did not. Daniel looked genuinely surprised, but wisely chose not to speculate further. Would you like me to investigate? Damien shook his head with quiet confidence. Not yet. I prefer facts before conclusions. Meanwhile, Serena continued her responsibilities with the same professionalism that had always defined her work. Every morning she arranged fresh flowers throughout the estate, greeted employees with sincere kindness, and prepared guest rooms for relatives arriving ahead of the wedding celebration. Yet Damien noticed subtle changes others overlooked. She smiled less often when Victoria entered a room. She frequently paused before responding to simple questions, as though weighing every word against an invisible burden. Once, while replacing books inside the library, Serena carefully reached for a framed family photograph that had slipped slightly out of place. She gently straightened it before quietly whispering to herself, "Everyone deserves the truth." She never realized Damien had entered the hallway only moments earlier and had heard those few softly spoken words. He did not interrupt her. Instead, he quietly walked away, carrying with him one more piece of a growing puzzle. That evening, Victoria hosted an intimate dinner for several close friends involved in the wedding planning. Laughter filled the formal dining room, while crystal glasses reflected warm candlelight across the long polished table. Victoria appeared radiant, charming every guest with effortless grace. Serena moved silently between the tables, serving each course with calm efficiency while avoiding unnecessary conversation. Damien watched both women throughout the evening. One appeared perfectly comfortable beneath everyone's attention. The other seemed most at ease only when no one noticed her at all. As the final guests prepared to leave, Damien stepped onto the terrace overlooking the rain-soaked gardens. Cool evening air carried the scent of fresh roses across the stone pathways below. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, reflecting on everything he had learned without anyone realizing he had been searching. The answers remained incomplete, but one conclusion had already become impossible to dismiss. Whenever appearances and quiet integrity stood side by side inside his home, it was never the loudest voice that earned his trust. And for the first time since his engagement began, the person he believed least involved in his future had quietly become the one whose honesty he trusted the most. Morning sunlight stretched across the eastern wing of the Moretti estate as preparations for the wedding continued with flawless precision. Florists arranged fresh white roses along the grand staircase. Decorators measured elegant table settings across the ballroom, and delivery trucks quietly arrived through the service entrance carrying everything needed for the celebration that now stood less than 2 weeks away. To every visitor, the mansion reflected excitement and anticipation. Only Damien Moretti understood that every beautiful detail now rested upon a foundation he no longer trusted. He had reached a decision during the previous night. He would not accuse anyone without certainty, and he would never place another person in the impossible position of choosing between fear and honesty. If the truth existed, it deserved to be uncovered through patience rather than pressure. Throughout the morning, Damien observed Serena Brooks from a respectful distance. She worked with the same quiet discipline that had first captured his attention. She carefully directed vendors toward the correct reception rooms, replaced flowers damaged during transportation, and even paused to help one of the newer kitchen assistants reorganize serving trays after an accidental mix-up delayed breakfast preparations. Not once did she complain about the additional work. Instead, she smiled gently and thanked everyone who offered even the smallest assistance. Watching her move through the estate, Damien noticed something he had overlooked for months. Serena never behaved differently when important people were nearby. Her kindness remained exactly the same whether she was speaking with a senior event planner or a young maintenance employee polishing the marble floors. That consistency could not be rehearsed. It belonged to character. Later that afternoon, Damien crossed paths with Serena in the conservatory where soft sunlight filtered through tall glass walls onto rows of blooming orchids prepared for the ceremony. She was trimming the stems of fresh lilies before placing them into crystal vases. Hearing footsteps, she immediately stood respectfully. "Good afternoon, Mr. Moretti." Damien returned the greeting with his usual calm expression. "Good afternoon, Serena. The flowers look beautiful." She smiled modestly. "Thank you, sir. I hope the guests will enjoy them." Damien looked around the peaceful room before speaking again. "You have helped prepare every detail for this wedding." Serena lowered her eyes for a brief moment. "I simply want everything to go well." Damien studied her thoughtful expression. Even when carrying something difficult, Serena's hands paused gently around the stems she was arranging. She looked at him with quiet surprise, as though wondering whether his question carried a deeper meaning. After several silent seconds, she answered carefully. "Sometimes doing the right thing takes longer than people expect." Damien nodded slowly. "I believe that is true." Neither of them said anything else. There was no accusation, no explanation, only a brief exchange that somehow carried more understanding than either intended. As Damien walked away, Serena remained standing among the flowers, her heart unsettled by the strange feeling that Mr. Moretti had somehow begun seeing burdens she had worked so hard to hide. That evening, Damien returned to his private office overlooking the estate gardens. Daniel Mercer arrived shortly afterward with updated guest confirmations for the wedding weekend. After reviewing the final page, Damien quietly closed the folder. "Daniel," he said thoughtfully, "please arrange a private family gathering here next Saturday evening instead of the engagement rehearsal dinner." Invite everyone exactly as planned, but do not announce any changes until I personally approve the final schedule. Daniel looked puzzled but trusted Damien without hesitation. Of course. As the office grew quiet once more, Damien turned toward the window where the setting sun cast long golden reflections across the gardens below. His investigation was nearly complete. The missing pieces were beginning to settle into place, and although no one else inside the estate realized it yet, the celebration everyone expected was quietly becoming something entirely different. Saturday evening arrived with the quiet elegance everyone had anticipated, but beneath the warm lights of the Moretti estate, an entirely different plan was unfolding. Luxury vehicles filled the circular driveway as relatives, longtime friends, business associates, and trusted advisors stepped into the grand entrance hall, greeting one another with warm smiles and congratulations. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the marble floors while a string quartet performed gentle classical music from the balcony above. Every guest believed they had gathered to celebrate the final days before Damien Moretti's wedding. Victoria Langford welcomed each arrival with effortless grace, wearing a sophisticated ivory evening gown that reflected the soft candlelight surrounding the ballroom. She appeared completely at ease, thanking guests for attending and speaking enthusiastically about the ceremony scheduled for the following week. Watching her from across the room, no one would have imagined that anything was different. Serena Brooks quietly moved among the guests with the housekeeping staff, making certain refreshments remained perfectly arranged, and every table reflected the same flawless presentation expected throughout the evening. She carried herself with calm professionalism, speaking only when necessary and thanking each employee who assisted her. Although the ballroom shimmered with celebration, Serena felt an unfamiliar weight resting quietly on her heart. She could not explain why the atmosphere seemed different, only that something about Damien's calm expression throughout the evening felt unusually thoughtful. Damien himself greeted every guest with the same composed confidence that had defined him for years. He smiled warmly, shook hands, and thanked everyone for joining the gathering. Nothing in his posture suggested conflict or uncertainty. Daniel Mercer stood nearby observing everything with quiet curiosity. Only he knew the evening's schedule had been changed at Damien's personal request, and even Daniel still did not understand the reason. As dinner concluded, the conversations throughout the ballroom gradually softened when Damien stepped onto the small platform traditionally reserved for welcoming remarks. Crystal glasses reflected the golden light, while every face naturally turned toward him. Victoria smiled proudly, believing she already knew the speech he was about to deliver. Damien allowed the room to settle into complete silence before speaking in his calm, measured voice. Thank you all for being here tonight. Your friendship, your trust, and your presence have always meant more to me than I can properly express. The guests responded with warm smiles. Damien continued, throughout my life, I have believed that the strongest foundations are built upon honesty, respect, and the courage to face difficult truths with dignity. Victoria's pleasant expression remained unchanged, but Serena quietly lowered her eyes, suddenly feeling her heartbeat quicken. Damien paused for only a moment before continuing. During the past several days, I have spent considerable time reflecting upon those values. Reflection has a remarkable way of revealing the difference between appearances and reality. The ballroom grew noticeably quieter. Conversations disappeared completely. Even the musicians rested their instruments without instruction. Victoria slowly turned toward Damien, her confident smile fading only slightly as uncertainty briefly crossed her face. Serena remained completely still beside the refreshment table, her hands gently folded together while she silently prayed that whatever happened next would not bring unnecessary pain to anyone involved. Damien looked across the room with the same steady composure that had earned the respect of every person present. There was no anger in his eyes, no desire to embarrass anyone, only the calm certainty of someone who had finally gathered every piece of a difficult truth. As his gaze briefly met Serena's, she immediately understood something she had never imagined possible. He knew, somehow, without a single conversation between them, Damien had already discovered far more than she had ever intended him to learn. At that quiet moment, before another word had been spoken, Every carefully maintained appearance inside the Moretti estate stood balanced upon the edge of a single decision, and only Damien knew that the next few minutes would quietly change every future that had once seemed certain. The silence inside the ballroom became so complete that even the gentle crackle from the fireplace seemed unusually loud. Every guest remained focused on Damien Moretti, waiting for him to continue. He stood with calm confidence, neither raising his voice nor allowing emotion to control his words. Years of leadership had taught him that truth carried far greater strength when spoken without anger. He slowly looked around the room before continuing. A wedding is more than a celebration. It is a promise built upon trust. Without trust, every beautiful decoration becomes only decoration, and every promise becomes only words. No one interrupted. Victoria maintained her graceful posture, though the confidence in her expression had begun to fade. Damien continued speaking with remarkable composure. During the past several days, I discovered that important decisions concerning my future were made without honesty. I also learned that someone inside this home carried the burden of protecting a truth that should never have belonged to them. His words settled over the room like quiet rain. Several guests exchanged uncertain glances, unsure where the conversation was leading. Victoria finally stepped forward with a polite smile that no longer reached her eyes. Damien, perhaps this conversation would be better held privately. Damien looked at her with genuine calm. I considered that. But every person gathered here has traveled to celebrate a commitment founded upon sincerity. They deserve honesty as much as I do. Victoria's smile disappeared completely. Damien gently placed a thin folder onto the podium beside him. Over the last week, I carefully reviewed financial records, contract revisions, and conversations connected to our upcoming marriage. I discovered changes made without my knowledge, explanations that did not match documented facts, and decisions presented as mutual when they were not. He never exaggerated his conclusions or accused her of crimes. He simply described verified facts with measured precision. The room remained silent. Victoria lowered her eyes toward the folder before looking back at Damien. You investigated me? She asked quietly. Damien answered with complete honesty. I sought clarity after realizing important truths had been hidden from me. He paused before adding the sentence that changed the atmosphere forever. The first warning did not come from evidence. It came from a conscience. His eyes slowly turned towards Serena Brooks, who stood near the back of the ballroom beside the serving table. Serena immediately looked down, visibly overwhelmed by the unexpected attention. Damien spoke gently so that no embarrassment touched his words. Serena never approached me. She never attempted to influence me. She never betrayed anyone's confidence for personal benefit. Instead, she struggled quietly because she believed honesty mattered more than comfort. Serena's eyes filled with emotion, but she remained completely silent. Damien continued. The greatest act of integrity I witnessed during this entire experience came from the person with the least authority inside this room. Many guests slowly turned towards Serena with entirely different expressions than they had carried only moments before. No longer did they see only a member of the household staff. They saw someone who had chosen conscience over convenience despite carrying responsibilities that were never hers to bear. Damien looked back toward Victoria with respect rather than resentment. I sincerely hope you find the life you wish to build, but I cannot enter a marriage after losing confidence in the foundation beneath it. His voice remained steady. For that reason, I am respectfully ending our engagement today. No dramatic outburst followed. No raised voices disturbed the peaceful evening. The quiet dignity with which Damien spoke left no room for argument. Crystal chandeliers continued glowing above the motionless guests while the elegant ballroom, prepared to celebrate the beginning of one future, instead became the place where truth gently closed one chapter and allowed another to begin. When the final words left Damien Moretti's lips, no one inside the ballroom moved for several long seconds. The elegant room remained exactly as it had been only moments before, filled with crystal chandeliers, white roses, polished marble, and beautifully dressed guests, yet everything felt completely different. The celebration that had been planned for months quietly came to an end, not through anger or humiliation, but through the calm weight of truth. Damien stepped down from the platform and walked toward Victoria with the same respect he had shown her throughout their relationship. His voice remained gentle. I sincerely wish you a future filled with peace, but it cannot be the future we plan together. Victoria looked at him silently before lowering her eyes. For the first time since anyone had met her that evening, she seemed unable to find the perfect words. Without another argument or dramatic farewell, she quietly thanked the guests for coming and left the ballroom with quiet dignity. Several close relatives accompanied her, while the remaining guests continued standing in thoughtful silence, reflecting upon everything they had witnessed. No one applauded. No one celebrated. The room seemed to understand that honesty deserved respect rather than spectacle. Damien remained where he was for another moment before turning toward the staff members who had worked tirelessly to prepare the evening. Thank you all, he said sincerely. None of this changes how grateful I am for your dedication. One by one, employees slowly returned to clearing tables and gathering decorations, though the atmosphere had become noticeably lighter. Serena Brooks quietly continued helping fold table linens, hoping to avoid unnecessary attention. She believed the evening should remain focused on Damien rather than herself. As she carried a stack of crystal glasses toward the service hallway, she heard calm footsteps approaching behind her. Turning around, she found Damien standing only a few feet away. Miss Brooks, he said warmly. Serena immediately lowered her eyes with respect. Mr. Moretti. Damien smiled gently. There is something I have wanted to say for several days. Serena looked up, uncertain. You never came to me with accusations. You never tried to gain anything for yourself. You simply struggled because your conscience would not allow you to ignore what you believed was right. Serena answered softly. I was afraid that speaking carelessly might hurt people even more. Damien nodded. That is exactly why I trust your character. She remained silent, deeply moved by his words. Damien continued. People often believe loyalty means protecting comfort. I believe true loyalty protects truth, even when truth is difficult. Serena smiled with quiet humility. My parents always taught me that respect must begin with honesty. Damien looked toward the ballroom, where guests slowly prepared to leave. They taught you well. Several weeks later, the Moretti estate had become noticeably different. Wedding decorations had been replaced with fresh seasonal flowers. The atmosphere felt peaceful once again, and daily life settled into a quieter rhythm. Damien introduced several new employee development programs, expanded educational opportunities for household staff, and personally thanked every member of the estate for their contributions during a private appreciation luncheon. Serena accepted a newly created management position overseeing hospitality operations, though she remained exactly the same person everyone had always known. She still greeted every employee by name, still arrived before sunrise, and still believed that no act of kindness was ever too small to matter. One crisp autumn morning, Damien crossed paths with Serena while walking through the estate gardens. Golden leaves drifted gently across the stone pathways as sunlight filtered through the old oak trees. They paused beside a fountain, exchanging relaxed smiles that carried none of the distance that had once existed between employer and employee. Neither rushed to speak. Neither needed to. Sometimes the deepest respect grew quietly, one honest choice at a time. And on that peaceful morning, surrounded by the calm beauty of a new season, Damien finally understood that the greatest blessing he had received was not discovering who could not be trusted. It was discovering the quiet strength of someone whose character had remained unchanged when no one believed anyone was watching.